Think about those small businesses you see every day. You know, the local coffee place that will shop downtown. What if, like, a huge economic shock just threatened to wipe so many of them out?
Yeah.
That's kind of the storm that seems to be brewing now for businesses relying on Chinese imports. We saw that report, April 29th, 2025.
Absolutely. And that's what we're digging into today, these new 145% tariffs on Chinese goods. We really want to focus on the impact, especially why small businesses seem to be in such a tough spot.
Exactly. We've gone through quite a bit of material killer startups, Fulfeda, Old National Bank, NerdWallet, CBS News, the Richmond Fed, CO, that's the U.S. Chamber of Commerce one, right?
Right. And dragon sourcing, too.
So think of us as, well, guides through all this. We're trying to make sense of it, not just throw numbers at you. What does this actually mean?
Yeah, our goal, our mission here is to really get a handle on how big this potential crisis could be. We need to look at why small businesses are, particularly vulnerable and what the wider fallout might be for the economy. And maybe most importantly, what can these businesses actually do? What strategies might work? We want to equip you with some solid understanding here.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The potential scale sounds, well, pretty alarming. Ryan Peterson, he's the CEO of Flexport, the logistics company.
Right.
He put out this really stark warning. He's saying, look, if these 145% tariffs stick, maybe 0% of small businesses relying on China could just go bust.
Wow, 80%.
Yeah, that could mean millions of job losses.
Yeah.
A huge hit to Main Street entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
A number like that, it's hard to just brush off.
It really is. And look at the sheer volume of trade we're talking about. In 2024, the U.S. brought in, $439 billion worth of stuff from China?
$439 billion.
Yeah. That's over 13% of all our imports. And those goods, they feed into something like $2 trillion in retail sales down the line.
$2 trillion.
So if you suddenly disrupt that flow, the ripples across the whole economy could be huge. It's like pinching off a major artery.
And it's not just theory, is it? Flexport saw it in their own numbers. A 35% drop in ocean freight bookings out of China just in the week after the tariffs hit.
A 35% drop. Immediately.
Immediately. And Peterson thinks it could lead to a 50% collapse industry-wide for that specific trade lane. That's a real-time snapshot right after those Liberation Day tariffs were announced back on April 2nd.
And it's important, I think, to remember this won't hit everyone equally. The big players, the Fortune 500s.
Right.
They have scale. They have buying power. Maybe they can absorb some costs, or maybe they can twist some arms and renegotiate terms.
No more leverage.
Exactly. Small businesses often running on really thin margins. They just don't have that luxury. It's a very different ballgame for them.
So, okay, why are the smaller guys so uniquely vulnerable here? The sources seem to point to, like, four main structural weaknesses. First one they call concentration risk. Apparently, most small and medium businesses that import finished goods, they rely on just one country.
Just one.
And for 75% of them, guess which country?
China.
China. And they don't usually have the cash or the know-how to just quickly switch suppliers to somewhere else.
And that ties into the second point, lower negotiating power. Picture a giant factory in China churning out millions of widgets.
Yeah.
They're going to prioritize the massive orders from the big global brands, right? That small order from a little online shop, it just doesn't carry the same clout. They might get pushback or face worse pricing.
Makes sense. Okay, and then there's the problem of passing on the cost. Like if you're a huge department store with thousands of items,
Right.
maybe you can spread a small price hike across everything. But what if you're a micro brand with just one main product, your hero product?
Yeah, that's tough.
If you suddenly have to jack up the price by, say, 40% or more because of the tariff, you could easily price yourself right out of the market, lose all your customers.
Definitely. And the last one is this working capital crunch. This is critical. SMEs often pay like 30 to 50% upfront for their orders.
Right, before it even ships.
Exactly. Then the rest when it ships. Now, imagine suddenly getting hit with 145% duty on top of that, payable almost immediately. That can just wipe out their cash reserves for the whole quarter. And the data suggests only something like 17% feel they could easily get emergency financing for that kind of shock.
Only 17%. That leaves a huge number in a really tight spot.
A very precarious position.
CBS News also sort of underlined this, didn't they? Pointing out that small businesses, usually fewer than 500 employees, revenue under maybe $7.5 million, They just don't have those deep pockets, but less financial flexibility overall.
Yeah, exactly. And there was that quote from Emily Lay, owner of Simplified, the stationery business.
Oh, right. What does she say again?
She said, this additional tax burden is catastrophic to our business. There's a limit to how much we can increase prices before we price ourselves out of the market.
Catastrophic. That really says it all, doesn't it? It shows the tightrope they're on.
It really does.
So, okay, this isn't just about individual shops struggling. It leads us to think about the bigger picture, the broader economic effects, the logistics headaches.
Absolutely. And a key concept here is landed cost. That's, the total cost to get a product from the factory floor to your warehouse or store. Purchase price, shipping, insurance, and duties.
All of it.
All of it. So when tariffs jump over 100%, like this 145%, it just flips the whole economic calculation for a lot of products. Direct trade might just not make sense anymore.
Yeah.
Even the Chinese Ministry of Finance basically said, look, at these tariff levels, there is no longer a market for U.S. goods imported into China. And we have to remember China hit back too, right? 125% tariffs on some U.S. stuff.
Like the retaliatory tariff, so it cuts both ways.
It does. And this massive disruption in trade flow puts huge pressure on the logistics networks. Think about it, shipping volumes suddenly drop on these major routes.
Throws everything off.
Completely. Capacity planning for the shipping lines, the freight forwarders, the warehouses, it all gets chaotic. It's this complex web, and you pull one thread hard, everything else gets tangled.
And it's not just the volume, right? It's the process itself, customs.
Yeah, exactly. Higher tariffs often mean more scrutiny at customs, more inspections, more potential for delays. And think about storage costs. If your inventory is suddenly way more expensive because of the duty, holding onto it gets costlier too. It just makes international trade riskier and more expensive all around.
And the macro level impact. You mentioned Goldman Sachs cutting China's GDP forecast partly because of this.
That's right. These trade tensions, the potential impact on that huge logistics workforce in China, maybe 10 to 20 million people tied to U.S. exports, it has real macroeconomic consequences.
Which sectors are getting hit hardest, do we know?
Well, the ones really deeply tied into that trans-Pacific supply chain feel it most acutely. So you're looking at automobiles, electronics, definitely, the whole retail sector, and even some parts of agriculture.
And all this uncertainty, it must just paralyze long-term planning, right?
Absolutely. Businesses hate uncertainty. Why would you make a big investment in, say, optimizing your supply chain or building new logistics infrastructure if you have no idea what the trade rules will look like next year or even next quarter?
It makes sense.
And that brings us to that Richmond Fed analysis. They really stressed how supply chains are these major channels for spreading economic shocks globally.
Right, like amplifiers.
Exactly. Their research suggested maybe half the total impact of a disruption comes from this amplification through the supply network. We saw that clearly during the pandemic, didn't we?
Oh, definitely. International supply chain chaos absolutely magnified the economic problems here in the U.S.
No question.
Okay, so given this, well, pretty bleak picture, what can small businesses actually do? Are there practical steps they can take to try and survive this?
Well, yeah, there are strategies being discussed. Some experts are suggesting this kind of 5-step triage plan for small importers to start with.
Triage, okay, like emergency steps.
Yeah. Kind of. First step, diversify, but incrementally. Don't try to change everything at once. Maybe pick one product, one SKU, or even just one component.
Just start small.
Start small. Try shifting that one thing to a supplier in a different country. Test the waters, figure out the lead times, build that new relationship slowly.
Okay, that sounds manageable. What's step 2?
Step 2 is lighten your inventory. The advice is to maybe aim for just 2 to 3 months of stock on hand.
Not too much, not too little.
Exactly. It gives you a buffer if there are shipping delays, but you're not tying up tons of cash in inventory that might face more tariffs or see demand drop. It's risk management.
Okay, got it. Third step.
Third involves looking into duty drawback and tariff engineering. Duty drawback means trying to reclaim duties you paid on imported goods if you later export those goods.
Wow, okay.
And tariff engineering is, well, it's about carefully looking at how your product is made and classified. Can you change a component or source something slightly differently to maybe fall into a lower tariff category? It's technical, but potentially saves a lot.
Interesting. Requires some expertise, I imagine. What's number 4?
Fourth is automating your landed cost modeling. Basically, using software, probably cloud-based tools that keep track of changing duty rates, shipping costs, everything in real time.
So you know your true costs.
Precisely. So you can price accurately and don't get nasty surprises that kill your margins. Accurate costing is vital right now.
Makes sense. And the last step in this triage.
Final one is join forces. Get involved with trade groups, industry associations.
Safety in numbers?
Pretty much. These groups lobby policymakers. They push for exemptions, for maybe phasing in the tariffs instead of the sudden shock, or other kinds of help. A collective voice is often much louder than a single small business.
Right. So those are the immediate steps. What about bigger, longer-term changes to supply chains?
Yeah, the long game is really about building more resilience and more geographic diversity. That means seriously accelerating efforts to find suppliers outside China.
Where are people looking?
Places like Southeast Asia, Mexico, maybe Eastern Europe. And considering options like nearshoring, bringing production closer, maybe to Mexico or Canada, or friendshoring, focusing on countries with stable political ties.
So fundamentally rethinking where things are made.
Yes, and maybe even redesigning distribution networks. Where do you hold inventory? What transport modes do you use? Maybe even building new facilities elsewhere. And technology plays a big role here too. Platforms that give you visibility across your whole supply chain, better risk analysis.
What about reshoring? Bringing manufacturing all the way back to the U.S.? We hear about that a lot. Is that realistic for small businesses?
Well, it's appealing in theory, right? Shorter lead times, more control. But the immediate challenge is often cost, especially labor costs.
It's higher here.
Significantly higher. That CBS News piece had that example, a U.S.-made candle jar costing way more than one from China, even with the new tariffs.
Right.
So for many small firms, a quick shift to purely domestic production just isn't financially feasible right now unless there are huge leaps in automation or something changes drastically.
The folks at Old National Bank also had some pretty practical tips, didn't they?
They did. A lot of good, actionable advice, like number one, actively look for and check out alternative suppliers, both here and abroad. Don't wait.
Be proactive.
Exactly. And think strategically about price increases. Maybe you can't just hike the price. Can you bundle products, add extra value, position it as a more premium offering?
Get creative with pricing.
Right. Also, negotiate harder. Talk to your suppliers, see if you can get better payment terms, explore different financing options, and yes, keep reshoring in mind as a long-term possibility.
They also mentioned cooperative buying groups, which sounded interesting.
Yeah, that's where smaller businesses team up. They pool their orders to get more buying power, hopefully negotiating better deals like a larger company could.
Smart.
Also, leveraging third-party logistics providers, 3PLs, and sourcing specialists. These guys know the landscape, the regulations, the options. Use their expertise.
Don't try to do it all yourself.
Definitely not. And tap into your network. Talk to peers, join industry forums, find out where they're finding alternatives. Maybe explore domestic sourcing, if it makes sense, or even vertical integration, bringing parts of the process in-house. And if domestic just isn't working economically, they advised acting decisively to find a viable international alternative.
Dragon sourcing really hammered home the need for market research too, right?
Absolutely. You have to know what's happening, what are the trends, what are competitors doing. You can't make smart sourcing decisions in a vacuum. And of course, strong negotiation skills are always key. Plus, keep diversifying that supplier base. Don't get caught relying on just one source again.
And technology can help streamline all this.
For sure. Dragon sourcing mentioned AI tools becoming more common, helping with demand forecasting, finding potential suppliers, tracking orders. It can make the whole process more efficient. And one more thing they stressed, sustainability and ethical sourcing.
Increasingly important.
Very much so. Consumers care more. It affects brand reputation. It's becoming a baseline expectation.
Okay, so there are strategies, there are things businesses can do, but it still feels like there's this massive cloud of uncertainty hanging over everything.
There really is. That Killer Startups article mentioned, for instance, that 5 SMEs are actually suing the administration.
Suing? On what grounds?
Arguing the president overstepped his authority imposing these tariffs. So that adds a whole legal dimension, more unpredictability.
And politically, it sounds like mixed signals from the White House, maybe potential cuts later.
Exactly. There's been some talk, some hints, maybe tariffs this high aren't sustainable, maybe some reductions could come. But until something concrete happens, that uncertainty itself is toxic for business.
How can you plan?
You can't. How do you set prices for next season? How do you sign contracts with suppliers? How do you manage inventory? It makes everything incredibly difficult.
And the key O piece from the chamber, really captured that anxiety from business owners, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The big worries, shrinking profits, having to put expansion plans or hiring on hold. And yeah, the real fear that the business might just fail.
You mentioned Franco Salerno from the bridal shop.
Right, Dariana Bridal and Tuxedo. He said they're already feeling it, having to eat the extra tariff costs on dresses they'd already sold at the old price. That hurts.
And it's not just the cost, it's competitiveness, too, especially globally.
Yeah, Mary Gordon from Central Safety Equipment worried about that. If other countries put retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, her overseas customers might just buy locally instead. So if you import and export, you could get squeezed from both sides.
And the fear about hiring and growth seems widespread.
Very. Stephanie Baums at Nestle called it a complete lack of clarity, making planning impossible. Marie Olberding at Select Arc Inc. said they might have to cut back on hiring plans.
Wow.
And Brittany Heiser from Pluie Inc. voiced that fear that many small businesses might just fold under the pressure.
Even the really tiny businesses are feeling it.
Yeah, the article mentioned a single-person business, Dancing Muse costume shop, seeing prices rise on materials, worried customers won't have money for costumes. It really hits businesses of all sizes.
So that advice from Old National Bank about financial resilience seems extra important right now.
Absolutely critical. Regularly checking your financial health, keeping a close eye on policy changes, and building that emergency fund. It's basic blocking and tackling, but essential for weathering this kind of storm.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up, this deep dive. It really shows these new tariffs are a serious threat, especially for small businesses relying on China.
No doubt about it. It's a major immediate challenge with potentially big negative ripple effects across the economy. Small businesses are uniquely vulnerable, we've seen why, but there are strategies they can explore, even though it's unclear how well they work for everyone.
And the massive uncertainty just makes everything harder. It really calls for being proactive, adaptable.
Resilient, I guess.
Resilience is the key word, definitely.
So that leaves us with a final thought for you, listening. We've talked a lot about supply chains, how interconnected everything is, like that Richmond Fed point about amplification.
So how might these tariffs cause unexpected ripples in sectors that maybe seem totally unrelated to direct Chinese imports? What other dominoes might fall?
Yeah, it's worth thinking about those wider implications. And also, maybe the potential for innovation that comes out of this disruption. How might businesses adapt in surprising ways?
Definitely something to ponder. We encourage you to check out the sources we mentioned if you want to go deeper.
And keep following this story. It's definitely going to keep evolving.